Hi, I'm Guy Powell, and welcome to the next episode of the Backstory on the Shroud of Turin. If you haven't already done so, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more episodes. I am the author of the upcoming book, The Only Witness, a historical fiction tracing a possible history of the Shroud over the last 2 millennia. Today, we'll be speaking with Justin Robinson. He is an expert on Byzantine coins. So let me tell you a little bit about him. So he has an MA and a BBA in history, and he's been working many years in the coin industry. He is a fellow of the Royal Numismatic Society and a member of the British Numismatic Society. He's a regular contributor to Coin News, the UK's biggest selling coin magazine. He also writes for Coins and History Foundation, which shares fascinating stories behind some of the world's most important coins and metals. And one of his sayings is, a coin without a story is just a piece of metal, but a coin with a story becomes history in your hands. Justin, thank you for being here. Welcome.
It's very good to be here. Thank you, Guy.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us your backstory. Tell us how you got involved in the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, well, I mean, it happened when I was a small boy. I can remember probably aged about 9 or 10, having a look one day at my mother was reading a book. And I remember it had a blue cover and there was a photograph, a strange photograph of a bearded man on the cover. The book was actually Ian Wilson's absolutely best-selling novel based on the Shroud of Turin. And I remember asking my mother about this image that appeared on the back of the book, and she explained to me what it was, and I was absolutely hooked. And when she'd finished reading it, I read it, and it was the very first, I think, non-fiction grown-up book that I had ever read. And it probably, without being silly, that probably sparked in me my love of history, which has continued to this day. And also, of course, my absolute fascination with this incredible object. It's an image that just simply shouldn't exist. I love to say to people that within the Shroud of Turin, I think you see the paths of history, science, and religion all sort of combining in one incredible, unbelievable object. And I think that regardless of how you approach it, whether you approach it from a purely scientific point of view or from a historical point of view or from a point of view of a person of faith, I think the Shroud has some amazing things to tell us. I mean, it's an absolute mystery, and I love mysteries. So I was hooked from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I also got hooked on one of Ian Wilson's books as well, and it just it hooked me, and I've been hooked for about 20 years now.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible, and I know Ian has obviously gone on. He's one of the foremost authorities on the Shroud, and one of the lovely things is in recent years I've actually got to know him and speak to him, and he's been enormously helpful with some of the articles that I've been putting together, and it still gives me such an incredible thrill, when I get an email from him from Australia, to think that this is the guy who really started me out with my love of history. And of course, I've got that lovely memory of my mother, who sadly is no longer with us, but I can remember very, very well the long conversations I had with her about the book after reading it, and the discussions that we had. And also, of course, with David Rolfe as well, and The Silent Witness, and that incredible sort of groundbreaking documentary that came out in the early 80s. I remember watching that with my mother now, and to think that one of my little coins is actually now featured in his latest documentary is wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And actually, I also interviewed David Rolfe, and we spoke about The Silent Witness, and his new movie, I think, is called Who Can He Be?
That's correct.
That's right. It's really, really good. I didn't realize that your coins were in there. So tell us about yes. So tell us about some of the coins. Tell us about what and how and why that image is so important.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that certainly I discovered. I mean, I've had a lifelong love of history, obviously, but it's only been in the last sort of decade that I've really had an opportunity to use my history in the workplace. And I work for a company that actually buys and sells rare coins. And on one particular occasion a few years ago, we were actually selling some gold coins from the Byzantine Empire, the Histaminon numisma, which was struck during the reign of the Emperor Michael IV in about 1034 to 1041. And my colleagues in the sales department wanted some interesting stories about this coin that they could share with their customers. And so obviously I told them the best story that I knew, which was, of course, that within Constantinople at that time, there was this mysterious object, the cloth of Edessa, or the Mandilion, and that this bore a mysterious imprint of Jesus that was not made by human hands. And so I gave them this story, and I said to them that obviously the coin engravers that were designing this is where this image that we have today, this iconic image of the bearded Christ, this is most likely where this came from. And of course, they were absolutely hooked and went off and were able to offer those stories to their customers. And I realized, I think, quite quickly that gold coins were a bit outside my budget, but I wanted to have a Byzantine coin that actually depicted the face of Christ on it. And so I began to look, and in 969, the Emperor John I Zimisces actually began to put the face of Christ on his bronze circulating coins. These obviously are much cheaper than the gold coins. They were mass produced. They would have been used all throughout the Byzantine Empire, and so I began looking for a good example of one of these bronze coins. And my search, basically, I looked at several different examples. One of the difficulties that we have with certainly the bronze coins today is because they would have circulated so widely. Very often, when you have the coins, the surviving examples today, obviously they're quite badly worn because they would have been in and out of people's pockets, and they would have been changing hands many times over many decades. And of course, the area that is most worn is always obviously the most raised area on the coin, and unfortunately for us, that would be the facial detail. So very often these anonymous followers have a completely smooth oval where Christ's face would have been. So that's no good for us in terms of seeing what they struck. But I stumbled across this incredible little coin as I was looking for one, and when I saw it instantly, I knew what I was looking at. I knew I was looking at the face that appears, as we know today, on the Shroud of Turin. And the implications of that were quite extraordinary, because this was a little coin that was struck in Constantinople in 969 AD. And we know, of course, that some 20 years earlier, the holy cloth, the Mandilion, had been brought from Edessa to Constantinople. It was their most prized historical relic. It was supposed to bear the mysterious face of Christ, not made by human hands. And so suddenly I'm looking at something that was struck, within 20 years of the image of Edessa coming to Constantinople, actually struck in Constantinople itself. So I thought this was quite astonishing, and I think that's what led me then to write the article that I did, obviously, and of course I had an opportunity then a year or so later to actually show it to Ian Wilson and to David Rolfe when I met them in Bristol, and they were very excited, and they invited me then to write an article which appeared then in the British Shroud of Turin Society journal. So that kind of sort of brought the story sort of around, and then I was able to find another one which was a little bit older, a little bit newer. It was about 50 years, struck about 50 years later. During the reign of Michael IV, and that was a slightly larger, because it was a slightly larger coin, a little bit more detail. Again, some phenomenal, detail, which I think it absolutely proves, conclusively, that the engravers were actually looking at something physical. They were actually looking at this image and carefully making this engraving match as closely as possible, trying to create the best possible likeness that they could. So it's a fascinating sort of investigation, I suppose, that I've been looking at. It's very interesting, because we know that the cloth, when it arrived from Edessa into Constantinople, it was considered to be too holy to go on public display at the time. And I'm pretty sure that the emperor would have wanted to make sure that a good likeness of the true face of Christ appeared on his coins. And so I'm pretty sure that the engravers would have been granted a special viewing of the Mandylion so that they could produce an accurate likeness of the Holy Faith. And I wonder whether the decision to depict Christ on the circulating bronze follis was intended to commemorate the fact that it was now safely in the ownership of in Constantinople, in the emperor's safekeeping. And I sense that there was a little bit of a celebration, perhaps, throughout the Byzantine Empire that the Holy Mandylion was now safe in the hands of their Christian emperor. It's very interesting because the words that actually surround the face on the cloth are the words "God with us," and I think that that's definitely a celebratory tone. It suggests that this is something that they take great pride in. So I'm sure that the instruction that our little humble coin engraver was given was to go away and actually create the best possible likeness that he could, and he did us a huge favor, because what he did, unlike some of his contemporaries who are working with gold coins, they would have had more time. They would have had an opportunity to have created a carefully crafted face. They would have been able to have obviously copied some of the details, but they would have been looking at the intricacy of creating a beautifully detailed portrait of a bearded figure. Now, our coin engraver didn't have that luxury, because he was having to churn out a huge number of these bronze follis very, very quickly. And so as dies wore out, obviously they had to be quickly replaced. And so they needed an image that could be very, very easily and very quickly sort of carved into the die, engraved into the die, ready for striking. And so what I think he did, which I think he took a very novel approach, and when you actually have a look at the image, and I know we can have a look at the 969 AD image. I know you've got one there. That's right. What we actually see here is, as I said, this extraordinary sort of level of detail that he's able to do. But what he does is he copies the lines that appeared, I believe, on the Holy Mandylion. So rather than trying to create a very detailed, intricate face, he's actually simply copying the lines. And of course, for us, that's absolutely perfect, because when we hold up what he did on a little 1 centimeter diameter coin, and we hold that up against the face of the Shroud of Turin, we see these incredible points of detail, which suggests to me quite clearly that he must have seen this in order to copy it. So, for example, we see, I think most distinctively of all, a very distinctive cross shape, which incorporates the eyebrows, the forehead, and the nose. We see a very small square underneath the moustache. We see evidence of injury to the cheek, again, exactly as we would see on the actual Shroud of Turin itself. We see a forked beard. And I think one of the most fascinating things for me is we see 2 very distinct strands of hair that are running in parallel on the left-hand side. Again, this is all information which is present on the shroud itself. One thing I would also just want to very quickly point out as well, which you've got to remember, of course, is that if we want to see exactly what the designer actually engraved, we have to flip the image. So the image that actually appears on the coin is, of course, a mirror image of what would have actually been carved directly onto the die that was used to strike the coin. And when you flip the image that appears on the coin, then suddenly it just springs into view, and you see all of these. You can make out all of these details, and you can see exactly the same thing on the shroud itself. So that, I think, is fascinating. I think we see a huge amount of detail there. And when you think to yourself, I mean, this is the actual coin itself, and I appreciate you're not going to see it tremendously clearly because I'm holding it up. But the actual face appears actually, it's only 1 centimeter in diameter. It's tiny, absolutely tiny. To get that level of detail into it, I think is quite extraordinary.
And did they have? They didn't have magnifying glasses or anything like that.
No,
this was
they
pure straight eyes and working.
Absolutely, and I think phenomenal attention to detail. I mean, the actual, I mean, it would have required formidable talent. I think consummate patience and perfect vision to actually create, to actually put that directly onto the die without any magnification whatsoever. And it would have had to have been a relatively simple design, as I said, because they were striking so many of them. And I think that is why he took the decision to simply copy the lines that made up this mysterious image. rather than rather than create a more detailed, generic sort of image.
Any idea on how many dies the die maker might have made?
We don't. I mean, it's one of those interesting things. I mean, dies are very, very hard to find. I mean, I think there was one die which was discovered, which has sold recently from the Byzantine Empire. Dies, of course, were used until they were simply not striking good enough coins anymore, and then they were destroyed. And of course, there was a huge. I mean, dies would have been guarded very carefully, because if they fell into the wrong hands, obviously they could create good counterfeits with them. So as a result, we don't have many surviving, if any, surviving examples of dies, other than that, say, that one that I mentioned from the Byzantine Empire. We think, and they've been tested and done. We think that one die could have produced potentially about 15,000 coins.
Wow.
It's one of those things. It's a little bit. Unfortunately, it's not. We can't be absolutely sure. But the way that the coins would have been struck is that the main die, the main image, would have been carved directly onto the main, sort of almost like the anvil, effectively, which is where the coin blank would have been placed. Yeah. And then there would be another die which would have the back of the image on it. The back of the reverse of the coin would have been on a handheld piece of bronze, or which would have been then placed over the die and then struck very hard with a hammer, and that's what would obviously create the image. So as I said, in terms of how many, I mean, they would have been used. I mean, particularly with these bronze coins, obviously they would have been having to produce them at a very considerable rate, because they would have literally gone out around the Byzantine Empire.
What surprises me a little bit on the coins is that they're not as round as I would have thought. So did they have trouble then making them round, or is that just a process of how well they struck and how well they held the dies?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in terms of the roundness, no, I mean every coin strike by definition was going to be slightly different, because of course you've got that manual element of actually hitting it with a hammer. Of course, when you're looking at coins, the actual value of the coins came not from the fact that they were coins; it came from the metal that was actually being used. So it was basically just the image was basically certifying that this was a specific weight and quantity of that particular metal. Now, in terms of that, so I don't think people in those days were particularly. They needed to be completely round or anything like that. The shape of it was very much dictated by the strike. Very often, what they would do is they would take the coin blanks, and they were very often quite crudely made, if you like. They very often coin blanks could be made by taking wet sand and basically making holes in the sand and then pouring the molten metal over it to form in the little trough. So you were never going to get a completely round. That didn't happen until much later, when you had milled, the invention of milling and machines, who were doing that, and they would be putting a collar around the metal to hold the metal in place and to give it a rim, which is what we would know today with the coins that we would have in our pockets. But obviously, at this time, no. I mean, the coins were not being produced by that.
Yeah.
They were literally being made quite roughly, quite crudely. That the important thing was the actual metal content, rather than the finesse and how round particularly the coins were. But I mean, from that point of view, as I said, no two ancient coins are ever going to be exactly alike. Even if they were struck with the same die, they would still have differences in them by nature of the fact that there was not a standardized process for creating the coins.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the coin would be then, I guess, molten to start with, and poured into a trough, like you said, in sand, and then that would be the blank that then is dyed to make then the coin. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so the blank would be made. Obviously, then it would be cooled down. It would be then taken out of the mold that it had been made in. That coin was very often heated up a little bit, just to make it a little bit sort of pliant. Would be placed then obviously between the two dies and hit very hard with a hammer, and it was that then that obviously transferred the image onto it and turned it into a coin. So so coins generally were much flatter, obviously, because of the way that they were being produced, and because obviously with the striking. So the image, so the actual roundness of the coin would very much depend on how it was struck. So you're always going to get you're always going to get big differences there. The other thing, of course, as well, is that another very, very popular, unfortunately, thing for us, of course, is that coins were very often clipped. So people would actually shave bits off them for their own nefarious purposes, because obviously, because the coin's value lay in its size, if you could shave a little bit off here, a little bit off there, and nobody noticed, you could slowly start building up enough material of your own to perhaps create your own coin, or make your own coin, and that happened a lot. So I mean, certainly, you have to be aware of the fact that there are going to be imperfections, shall we say, with coins that have survived to the present day.
So there'd be a little bit of inflation as I as I had some coins and took some pieces off, and then all of a sudden I've got another coin. Well, it's funny too, because I was reading an article on coins, and one of the things that the emperors did was, as well, instead of being, let's say, for the gold coins, they would be solid gold, and then they would start to add in different metals because they just didn't have the money, and yet they were using them to basically print more gold coins. And I hate to say it, that's what we do today. Is we just print more coins or print more dollars. So
I mean, certainly, yes. I mean, and various different. I mean, I know within Britain, of course, the Tudor monarchs were notorious for debasing coins, and King Henry VIII debased his gold coinage quite considerably, and by simply, as you say, adding other inferior metals to it in order to make the gold last longer and make more coins from it. I mean, it is something that we don't do today, thankfully, because nowadays all of our coins are token coinage. So now, of course, the actual materials that are actually made to make our coins, they're not made in silver or gold or bronze. They're usually made in much cheaper alloys now, like cupronickel and things like that. And as a result, what we have now, the coins that we have in our pocket are not actually worth the metal that the coin is actually struck on, as they were in previous years, in previous centuries. So we all have what we call now a token coinage. So we know the value of the coin because it has the value of the coin stamped on it. It has nothing to do with the actual metal that's used to make it.
Well, and plus, as soon as you get into paper money, then the paper is just a representative of what you have. Right. And then technically, I mean, I used to have, and I think I still have one, I think it was a silver certificate. I don't think I have a gold certificate, but that was also supposed to be able to be traded in for a certain amount of silver. And then once we went off the gold or the silver standard, then that was no longer the case either for the paper money.
No, that's right. I mean, Britain had a gold standard up until the First World War, and our gold sovereigns were recalled. We're making gold sovereigns and gold silver gold half sovereigns. They were being circulated. And then when war broke out, they were recalled, and people were invited to take their gold sovereigns into the bank and exchange them for paper money to the same value. And of course, it didn't catch on. A lot of people were very reluctant to part with their gold coins and receive what looked like sort of worthless pieces of paper in return. And so you have these sort of stories. I mean, we discovered in Britain a few years ago, there was an incredible hoard of gold coins that was actually found in a piano. And somebody obviously had not heeded the government's request to take them into the bank and exchange them, but had simply buried them under the keys of their piano. And so there was a formidable hoard of these gold coins, which came to light a few years ago. So so you have these. That's right. I think the move over from gold coins, particularly, to sort of paper money, gold and silver to paper, certainly took a bit of getting used to, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So potentially the original coin from the Shroud of Turin was in the 640s or so, which is a gold coin under Justinian, and then there was a period afterward where the image of Christ was removed, and then it was in the 940s or so that we got back into the bronze and the gold coins. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, Justinian the second was the very first Byzantine emperor to want to put Jesus onto a coin, and it was a gold coin that he used. Now his reign, as I said, he reigned sort of it began in 692 AD. And it would seem that from the image that he created of this very iconic bearded image that we know, that perhaps coin artists would have journeyed to Edessa to actually see the mandilion. The gold solidus and the smaller gold coin, which is worth, I think, a third of the weight of the solidus, the tresmis, they both incorporate many fine details of this distinctive long-haired and bearded face that's sort of mysteriously imprinted onto the cloth. Now, what happened then, of course, is that Justinian II was deposed. Basically, he ran into some difficulty. He was deposed as emperor. His nose was cut off because they believed that a disfigured emperor, nobody would never be able to regain the throne. And obviously his coins that he had created, these gold coins with this bearded figure on them, were simply melted down and obviously reused. So some examples have obviously survived to the present day. But what makes Justinian quite special is that just a few years later, he was actually able to regain the throne. So we have this fascinating instance where he regains the throne, and then he wants to then obviously put the image of Jesus back onto his coin, but he doesn't use the bearded image. What he does when he comes back again for his second reign, he uses a completely different image of Jesus. He has a much more youthful looking face with thick curly short hair and a much smaller beard. Now that image is often referred to as the Syrian image because there have been similar depictions found in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now that poses an interesting question, because you think to yourself, well, what made him? Why did he do that? Why didn't he carry on using the iconic bearded image of Jesus that we know today? And I did discover, and whether this is the reason or not, I don't know, but I can throw it out there. That after Justinian was deposed, I know that the Byzantine Empire went to war with the Arab neighbors. And of course, at the time, we know that Edessa was in Muslim hands. It was occupied by Muslims. So whether or not that then closed the door to any further trips to Edessa to actually see the mandilion, it is a possibility. And that's why perhaps Justinian had to look elsewhere to find another image. I mean, it's only a hypothetical example, but that does seem to fit with what we know of what was happening around it. I mean, surviving examples of the earlier coins in Constantinople would have been quite scarce following the reign of the two emperors that had obviously deposed him. They would have been very keen to remove all traces of his predecessor. And so as a result, they wouldn't have had any of the earlier coins probably to copy or anything like that. It's interesting that on the new coins that Justinian had made, he actually depicts himself on the reverse, and he's holding up a globe inscribed with the word Pax, peace, on it, which I think was perhaps trying to show that he wanted to build bridges with his neighbours that his predecessors had gone to war with. I mean, it was the last time that a depiction of Christ with short curly hair and a thin beard would ever appear on the Byzantine coins. The reign of Justinian II, unfortunately, ended very abruptly in 711 AD with another military coup. And this time they left nothing to chance. They actually had him killed, Justinian killed, and his young son to sort of put an end to that. So unfortunately, that was the end of Justinian II. But it's an interesting, certainly an interesting thing. And then, as you mentioned, there was then a huge debate that raged for over 100 years as to whether or not they should be putting the face of Jesus onto coins, whether religious images or icons should be venerated in the way that they had been. And there was a big debate. Emperor Leo III banned all images of Christ in 726 AD. And ordered their destruction and persecuted and prosecuted anybody caught venerating them. And that situation wasn't resolved until 843 AD, when the Empress Theodora permitted the veneration of icons through the Byzantine Empire once again. And she restored the image of the long-haired, bearded Jesus to her coinage, which by now had become obviously the commonly accepted image of Christ throughout the Christian world. So I think it's so it's an interesting sort of debate, an interesting sort of discussion. And
well, and potentially, just as an aside in there, is one of the stories that I've read is that there were a series of earthquakes in Constantinople directly at the time, and then they were ascribing them to Justinian II having the image of Jesus on the coins, and that's when they basically became all iconoclasts and got rid of all the images out of the churches and then off the coinage and wherever else they might have been.
That's absolutely right. I mean, it's yes. I mean, there was a lot of that, and I think you were very much that was the official sort of line that that they wanted to make sure that that didn't happen again. And of course, yes, whenever even after the images then were restored onto the coins, every natural disaster was then blamed as being, oh well, you see, we've put those images of Christ onto coins, we shouldn't be doing that. And so it became very difficult. But it's no, I mean, it is an interesting one. I mean, it's and certainly it was, I think, very significant that that the emperor wanted to bring the Mandylion to Constantinople. And I know that obviously it was in a Muslim occupied area in Edessa. And I think it was 944, I believe it was, when they actually went and actually brought the image back. And I believe, if my memory serves, they exchanged the image of Edessa for 200 Muslim prisoners of war in order to be able to retrieve it from the city and bring it to Constantinople. And of course, when it arrived, there was so much rejoicing. I think we know that in 944, when the image actually finally arrived in Constantinople, there was huge sort of public rejoicing. The image itself was initially considered too holy to be put on public display, but it's fascinating because the people who did get to see it and wrote about it and reported about it, what they're describing resonates so strongly with what we know is in Turin Cathedral today. So one dignitary, for example, was struck by, he described it as the image as being formed with blood and water, sweat and image. And we know that in 1130 there was a monk who wrote that the mysterious cloth of Jesus bore the majestic form of his whole body, supernaturally transferred. So this is all very, very sort of significant, I think, for us. And I think what my little coin does, and certainly the two of them do, is to show that this Mandylion, this image of Edessa that was being venerated in the cathedral, seems to have had an image on it which was identical to the image that we have on the Shroud of Turin today.
So one thing too is if you were an anti-shroudist, you might say those coins the coins themselves are fake. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly fake coins are very unfortunately common. So as a result, people who work in the coin industry have to be enormously careful to make sure that they're authenticated. These two coins have been sourced, and obviously through legitimate means. They've come from respected coin dealers and supplied with a certificate of authenticity to ensure that they are exactly who they say they are. I mean, there are lots of telltale signs that we can have to identify if a coin is a fake. Very often, of course, when you're talking about ancient coins, the coins that are faked are usually the gold and silver. The coins that I have, the coins that actually have this incredible image of Christ on them, are bronze coins. They're circulating coins. They don't have a huge value, which also obviously means that they're less likely to be faked because simply the money isn't there for them. I mean, they can be bought relatively cheaply even today. And so from that point of view, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's very important. I mean, and any reputable supplier within the coin industry has to take it very, very seriously, and therefore provenance is very important. Where has this coin come from? Where has it been? you know, there are companies obviously then that exist to actually authenticate it and to make sure that it's absolutely genuine. There are lots of ways that they can do that. You know, metals react in different ways. So if something is purported to be gold, there are very simple tests that you can do to make sure that it is gold. You know, likewise, you can look at the actual coin itself, look at the edges of the coin itself, and see if there's anything that shouldn't be there, you know, as part of that metal. So lots of ways to authenticate it. I'm absolutely, as I said, the 2 coins that I've got here that I've been talking about are absolutely legitimate. I mean, that we know when they were struck, we know who struck them, we know where they were struck, and as a result, I think they can provide, I think, a very compelling testimony for the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin. I mean, certainly, what it does, what the coins do, is show that the image that was called the Mandylion, this supernatural image of Christ, is what we would today call the Shroud of Turin. You know, and of course, other people have done a huge amount of work to prove that connection and to demonstrate that connection. I mean, we know that the Mandylion was in Edessa right up until 1204 AD, when it was attacked and plundered by the French-led Fourth Crusade. We know that many priceless treasures from antiquity were then destroyed as the Crusaders rampaged through the city, seizing anything that they could find of value. And it was reported afterwards that they've taken many relics, including the linen in which our Lord Jesus was wrapped. You know, this is when the cloth of Edessa effectively disappears. This ghost-like image slips quietly into legend. But we know then that that there was a period then of over a century where you know, the location of this mysterious cloth is being sort of secretly moved around, and I know that it's been proposed, of course, that it's the warrior monks known as the Knights Templar who had it in their possession, and it was entrusted to their safekeeping. And what's fascinating, and I'm sure you know this, I must, but what is absolutely fascinating to me is that when the Knights Templar fell out of favour with the Pope, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay, was arrested with 60 of his knights in a dawn raid on Friday the 13th October 1307. That's where the Friday the 13th being an unlucky day comes from, and charged with heresy, which included worshipping the image of a bearded man. There were many years of torture and imprisonment followed, but they refused to divulge the whereabouts of their treasure. And eventually the King of France lost patience, and Molay, together with his deputy, the Templar Draper, a man called Geoffrey de Charnay, were both burned at the stake in Paris on the 18th of March 1314. And what, of course, is so significant is that in 1349, it's another Geoffrey de Charnay, most likely a descendant of the man who had died alongside Molay in Paris, who's also Geoffrey de Charnay. And he requests the permission from Pope Clement VI to display the burial shroud of Christ in his hometown in Leary. He doesn't divulge how the family came to have the cloth in their possession, but we can see a very, very clear connection between the Geoffrey de Charnay that was burned at the stake alongside the Grand Master of the Knights Templar in 1314, and with this Geoffrey de Charnay in 1349, revealing that his family have it in their possession. And of course, that's the cloth that is today in Turin Cathedral.
Well, one thing I like about, you know, we unfortunately have the carbon-14 dating, which said the shroud was 1260 to 1390. And here we have what is probably unequivocal proof that the coin was or that the shroud was either in Constantinople or in Edessa in the 940s, because of the coins. And then you also have it was also known of under Justinian, because he also had a coin in the 690s. So absolutely. 600 years at least prior to the dating from the carbon-14. So absolutely.
It really, and this blows the carbon-14 test, I think, completely out of the water. I mean, we know, you know, and obviously there's been new information where they've now released the data that the people, the British Museum, used to actually make their determination that the shroud was a medieval forgery. We know now that has now been completely discredited. Also, I mean, we also have the words of the carbon-14 testers as well. And I mean, and I'm not going to, name names, but of course, Sir Edward Hall, who actually said that when he was asked about the image, actually said, "Oh, well, there was a big market for forgeries in those days. Somebody went and got a bit of linen, faked it up, and flogged it." And those words that he used in 1988 at the press conference to reveal that the shroud was a fake absolutely stopped me in my tracks, because how could anybody with an iota of scientific curiosity actually refer to the Shroud of Turin as being something that could be very simply faked up and flogged, as if it was the easiest thing in the world? Well, we know that the Shroud of Turin is impossible to replicate even with modern 21st century technology. So I think that completely blows that out of the way. And I think it shows that there was a rush to judgment, that they had an agenda. They wanted to make sure that it was found to be faked. They had no interest whatsoever in how this image was formed, which I find absolutely amazing. How scientists could actually not have any scientific curiosity. And I think that so for me, I think yes, and these little coins themselves, even without the weight of all of the other information around them, shows, I think, quite compellingly that the artist must have seen the image on the shroud in order to make the plus. And the beauty of it is, you don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. You simply have to look at the coins and make your own mind up. And I think that's what's so fascinating. We know when these coins were struck. We know where they were struck, and you can look at that and make your own mind up, which I find brilliant.
Yeah, and not to get too far into the carbon-14 dating, but then they kept the statistics hidden for 20 years, and it took a Freedom of Information Act request to get the data, and that's then when it was revealed really that the statistics around the dating were wrong. But it's impossible. I mean, you simply cannot do that. In scientific community. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a great believer in science and good science. This was not good science. What we know about the cloth, they picked the worst possible place to actually cut the image. It was actually cut from a corner of a cloth that was being held up by had been held up by priests for centuries to display to the faithful, often for hours on end. In that time, it had become frayed and obviously damaged. There was a repair that was done to the cloth in that particular corner in order to strengthen it. We also know, of course, that carbon-14 tests can be completely skewed if the sample has been on fire. But we know of at least 2 instances where the shroud was subjected to fire. So however you look at it, I mean, this is not a credible thing to say that the Shroud of Turin is a late medieval forgery. There is simply no mandate for that. I mean, what we know about how the image was created, what we know about the image itself, the investigation that has been done, for example, into the pollen on the shroud, where we've actually been able to identify plants that grow throughout the areas where we know the shroud would have needed to be. So from Jerusalem through to Edessa, through to Constantinople, through to Lieri in France, and then down to Italy and Turin. We can chart the path that the shroud would have taken simply by looking at the pollen grains on it. Well, I'm going to interrupt you there.
Sorry.
And no, absolutely. I mean, I could go on, and I know you can. The coin stuff, I've got like another 10 or 15 questions I'd love to go through with you, and maybe we'll do that at a future date. But let's close it there, the interview. And but is there any one last thing you'd like to talk about the coins that we might not have gotten to, or?
Yeah, I think one little thing. I think that this is, and for me, this is the most intriguing implication about the Shroud of Turin and why it's so important. We know that the big legend surrounding the Knights Templar, of course, is that they protected the Holy Grail, this mysterious vessel that one of Jesus's followers, Joseph of Arimathea, used to collect Jesus's blood at the crucifixion. And I've always believed that that every legend, every myth has a kernel of truth in it to be discovered somewhere. And of course, the legend of the Holy Grail is often associated with the cup that Jesus used in his last meal with his disciples before his death. But it makes no sense to me how or why a drinking cup would have been used to catch Jesus's blood during his Roman public execution. Makes no sense to me at all. So then it gets me thinking, well, could that vessel containing the blood of Jesus have been something else? And the New Testament tells us that Joseph of Arimathea requested permission from the authorities, from Pontius Pilate, to collect Jesus's remains after the crucifixion. And we're told, and all four gospel writers tell us this, that he went and he wrapped Jesus's body in a linen cloth. Mark's gospel tells us that he went out and bought the linen, and it was taken, and obviously his friend's bloody body was transported to its tomb and placed in the tomb. And it's always fascinated me that this could be the origin of the legend that we have. Could the image of Edessa and the Shroud of Turin and the Holy Grail all be the same historical artifact? And I think that my little coins help to make that quite a compelling possibility. That what is in Turin Cathedral is nothing less than the Holy Grail of legend. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I do too, and I really like your point about this little coin, but it tells a story that goes on for 1,000 years or even more.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so to your bio with every coin can tell a story is really fascinating. So Justin, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I mean, I would love to continue the interview, but at some point we've got to close it.
Sure.
We will, however, put a PowerPoint presentation on the website, so you'll be able to download that and get even more information, because I think the coins, just as Justin has been talking about, really prove that the Shroud of Turin was known of well before the 1260 to 1390 carbon-14 dating. So where can they find out more? I know you've written a couple of articles. Where could they go to find out more?
Sure. Okay. Well, I mean, I've written an article, as I said, in Coinage, the December 2018 issue. I also write for a blog called the Coins and History Foundation. If you Google Coins and History Foundation, you can find my article. If you just have to type into Google Shroud of Turin Byzantine coins, I think you'll see that on the first page. That will take you to a lengthy article that I've written there about the Shroud and its connection, particularly with the Mandylion and obviously with the Holy Grail. So definitely a few
fantastic. Well, so we will definitely put those links on our website, guypowell.com. And then otherwise, again, Justin, thank you so much. Really fascinating. And thank you. And otherwise, then, for the audience, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. And again, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more episodes. And if you like this one, please rate it with 5 stars. Justin, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Guy. Take care.